Welcome to Fowey, a beautiful port town that's home to centuries of history, and which is today one of the most popular visitor destinations of all on Cornwall's beautiful south coast. Situated overlooking the mouth of the River Fowey, which takes its name from the town, this densely packed waterside settlement is full of things to see and do. And on this brief walk around Fowey, on a lovely summer's day, we'll explore everything from the town's historic parish church to its busy collection of pubs. And we'll even venture along the Esplanade towards the southern edge of town, where you can catch the historic ferry across the river to the neighbouring village of Polruan. All of that is to come as we make our way around Fowey over the next 20 minutes. But we begin our walk at the busiest part of town, the town quay. Always lively with activity on sunny days like today, the town quay is the historic heart of life in Fowey, having once upon a time been the main point of entry for trade into this once significant port town. Although Fowey's history can be traced back well over 1,000 years to the 7th century, and possibly even before then, this town really rose to prominence between the 14th and 17th centuries, when it served as the most important port in all of Cornwall. Located just a stone's throw away from the English Channel, Fowey was ideally positioned to serve as a major trading post with links to continental Europe. And so it proved, as Fowey quickly became a destination for huge commercial vessels from all over the continent, importing and exporting a wide variety of goods. Officially, trade was meant to be conducted only at this point of the river, the town quay. But as was commonplace across Britain's south coast for centuries, smuggling was rife in many more secluded spots around Fowey. But despite that, the success of trade at Fowey brought a lot of attention to this small, once isolated riverside town. Famous seafarers Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh both set out on a number of voyages from this very town, while Fowey also found itself on the front line of a number of great medieval conflicts between England and rival European powers. During its heyday, Fowey was attacked and plundered by raiders from France, Spain, the Netherlands, and even Brittany just across the Channel. This port town, therefore, often proving a victim of its own success. Centuries later, during the Second World War, meanwhile, more than 1,000 American soldiers were actually stationed here in Fowey, as they prepared to depart from British ports for Normandy and the D-Day landings. However, there's much more to Fowey's history than simply its role as a port town. In fact, just here we find an eye-catching statue which speaks to the town's rich literary heritage. Though it may at first glance look like one of the many seagulls you'll see flying around here, this statue actually depicts a rook with a book. And it's a clever nod to Fowey's famous association with the author Daphne du Maurier, best known for novels like Rebecca and The Birds, the latter of which was the inspiration for this striking avian monument. Throughout her life, du Maurier regularly holidayed in this part of Cornwall, specifically just on the other side of the River Fowey in the small village of Budinnick, and she incorporated many of her experiences of this region into her writings. But beyond the statue, the town quay is littered with an array of yet more interesting landmarks. For instance, in pink just here, we find a historic pub known as the King of Prussia, which was established around 400 years ago in the 17th century. It takes its name from a prolific Cornish smuggler who's said to have once lived at the pub. His name was John Carter, but he was nicknamed the King of Prussia. There are many different theories behind the origins of that nickname, but just beside the pub here we find Fowey's local aquarium, which has been running for over 70 years. Famously, the tanks at Fowey's aquarium are always filled with fresh seawater, pumped in at high tide, which provides the wealth of marine life on display with high-quality habitats. Like the town as a whole, Fowey's aquarium is far from large, but it's full of things to see, and just next door is the local museum, home to a wealth of exhibitions detailing the town's rich maritime history and more. But the building in which the museum is housed is also worth noting. It's one of the oldest structures in all of Fowey, dating way back to the 15th century, and as we can see, it now plays host to the town hall as well as the museum. A few feet away, in this densely packed part of town, is another pub, the Ship Inn. It's the oldest pub in Fowey, built in the year 1570 by a local merchant adventurer named John Rashley. And in the more than 450 years since, it's been at the heart of life in this bustling town. Initially as the place where fishermen, merchants and voyagers would interact, and today, where locals and visitors continue to mingle. Now, we've already seen how the area behind the town quay is densely packed with historic buildings, but one has a little bit more room to breathe, the local parish church, known as the Church of St. Fimbarrus. This beautiful place of worship has plenty of points of interest. Its tower is the second tallest in all of Cornwall, and the majority of the building dates back to the year 1460. Interestingly, the current church is a rebuild of a much earlier Norman church, which was destroyed by French raiders in the mid-15th century. But while it may have fallen victim to French attacks, this church was also a major stopping point on an important trading and pilgrimage route between France and Ireland, when merchants and worshippers would travel overland across Cornwall between the port of Fowey here and the town of Padstow, in order to avoid taking a perilous sea voyage around the notorious cliffs at Land's End, the site of countless shipwrecks through time. One man who followed this historic overland route was an Irish monk named Fimbarrus, and he set out from Cork in the south of Ireland for Rome, and on the way he passed through Fowey here, stopping to build a small church which later gained the name St. Fimbarrus's Church, a Latinised version of his name. That was back in the 6th century, hundreds and hundreds of years before the wealth of historic crosses and monuments in the churchyard here were built, and eras before the town of Fowey emerged as Cornwall's leading port. Little is known about Fowey when Fimbarrus built his early medieval church, but it's almost certain that a community existed here, the town's natural harbour making it ideal for the extensive trade between Cornwall and its Celtic neighbour Brittany on the other side of the channel. But Fowey only began to take the shape that we see today in the later medieval era, and here we find Fore Street, which stretches northwards out of the town centre, and which is lined by a wealth of historic buildings, many dating back to Fowey's heyday in the 15th and 16th centuries. Just here there stands the Lugger Hotel, a slightly more recent establishment of the 17th century, taking its name from the luggers, large sailing boats, which were regularly seen travelling through the port of Fowey. Now, luggers came in all shapes and sizes, and they were used for everything from day-to-day fishing to cross-channel trade, which, as we've mentioned, was one of the foundations of Fowey's economic fortunes in the medieval era. From this port, wool, fish, Cornish tin, and a wide range of goods were exported all over Europe, and this enticed hundreds of people to move to the area, hoping to make their own fortune off the back of this roaring commercial trade. That's part of the reason why Fowey's buildings are so crowded around the town quay and the riverside. And while it now makes for an especially quaint setting for a day out, this area was for centuries abuzz with commercial activity, as people loaded goods onto and off large boats, and merchants made deals with one another in and around the town's wide range of harbourside taverns. But we know from the King of Prussia that legitimate trade wasn't the only way that goods made their way in and out of Cornwall. Smuggling was once rife on this part of the coast too, particularly as Fowey's economic fortunes declined in the late 17th and 18th centuries. In the aftermath of the English Civil War, Fowey lost its status as a leading regional port. Much of the official trade that once came through here moved to Plymouth in Devon, and so local merchants turned towards smuggling as a way to keep their own economic fortunes afloat. Those who didn't turn to smuggling generally turned to fishing in the waters off the coast, this once great port town gradually turning into what many would now consider as a small fishing village. But despite this downturn, Fowey remained one of the busiest points on the south coast of Cornwall, as tin and copper mines were built in the hills surrounding the town in the 19th century, and then tourists began flocking here in the 20th century. As a result, the town today covers a much larger area than it once did. In fact, Lostwithiel Street here was once upon a time the site of Fowey's medieval-era Southgate, marking the edge of the historic heart of town. With the old gate long gone, we can immediately see that the buildings outside it are generally more modern than the historic houses which crowd around the town quay. This old church building is one of a number of 19th century buildings that you'll see as you venture further out of the town centre, into areas which are a little less busy with tourists, but which are just as beautiful and riveting as anywhere else in this wonderful port town. So we're now going to take a walk southwards towards the place where you'll find the Polruan Ferry, a small boat which links Fowey with the charming village of Polruan just on the other side of the river. Operating daily, a trip on the Polruan Ferry is one of the best things to do if you fancy exploring Fowey's captivating surroundings. If you visit Polruan, you'll discover a wealth of captivating heritage packed onto a network of narrow and steep streets, as well as beautiful views across Fowey Harbour from up on high on St Saviour's Hill. But perhaps most interestingly, as we make our way onto the long street known as the Esplanade, the village of Polruan is also home to the remains of a 16th century fort, known locally as the Castle, and it was one of two military fortifications which were built on either side of the River Fowey. By the power of deduction then, Fowey too is home to a historic military fort. And if you continue walking southwards along the Esplanade towards the coast, you'll find exactly that, a 16th century castle that's known as St Catherine's Castle. St Catherine's Castle was originally built on the orders of King Henry VIII to defend England's south coast from armies attacking from continental Europe, but it took up a number of other uses through time. To prevent enemy forces from sailing up the River Fowey and laying the town to waste, a large chain was stretched across the river's mouth between St Catherine's Castle and the Polruan blockhouse. Later in history, meanwhile, Fowey's castle was brought back into service on multiple occasions, in the 19th century during the Crimean War, and then during the Second World War, when it was used as a gun battery looking out across the channel. Today you can explore the remains of St Catherine's Castle for yourself absolutely free, yet another of the many great things to do on a day out here. But while there's indeed plenty of history to be discovered in and around Fowey, the rather quieter and more modern Esplanade here is a reminder of the way that this town transformed from a place of commerce and trade to a place of leisure in the last couple of centuries, with delightful cottages and riverfront houses now lining this street. People have been coming to Fowey for leisure purposes for well over 150 years now, the growing popularity of Victorian seaside holidays, considered good for one's health, laying the ground for the immensely popular tourist town that we see today. Today Fowey is an essential stop on any trip around Cornwall. The town even greets more than 6,000 boats every year, with the naturally sheltered harbour here providing the perfect place for tourists exploring Cornwall by sea to moor their boats before venturing onto dry land. Of course, most of us don't have a boat to just park up in the river, and so if you're wanting to visit Fowey from further inland to enjoy beautiful seaside views like the one we find here, then your best bet is to catch a bus from the nearby village of Parr, which has its own mainline railway station. You can indeed drive down to Fowey, but like the rest of Cornwall, the roads are narrow and can get exceptionally congested in the summer season. So take the bus, which will drop you off close to the heart of town. That being said, when you tell the bus driver where you want to go, then make sure to get this town's name right, because it's something which trips up thousands of tourists year in and year out. Spelt F-O-W-E-Y, at first glance you'd expect the town's name to be pronounced Fowey, but it's actually Foy, which rhymes with boy. This appears rather counterintuitive though, because in the Cornish language the town is known as Fowith, taking its name from the river, which is said to have been named after the beech trees which are found lining its banks. But the fact of the matter is that this is just one of seemingly countless names that this town has had over the centuries. Once upon a time its Cornish name was Fowey, but as English influence in this part of Britain became ever stronger, the name was transcribed in a variety of different ways, including Foy, Fowey, Fargus, and for some reason in the late 19th century it was named Troy. This goes some way to explaining the confusion surrounding the town's name, but ultimately the English pronunciation of Foy seems to have won out against a wealth of other competitors. By the way, if you were wondering where that random Troy came from in the late 19th century, it's generally attributed to the man who lived in this house, Sir Arthur Quiller Couch, a writer who published a novel which was named Troy Town, a story which unfolded in a thinly veiled Foy. Still, agreement on the town's name is much more universal today, and it's from this point in Foy that many venture down to the riverside to catch the ferry over to Polruan. We can see the village of Polruan perched on the hills just across the river, the boat linking it with Foy only taking a couple of minutes to cross the water. There are no bridges here at the mouth of the River Fowey, as large boats have long needed to sail inland, but there are a number of ferries linking the two banks, not only the one here to Polruan, but if you venture up to the north side of Foy, you'll also find a small ferry across to Berdinick, the village favoured by author Daphne du Maurier. Larger and more irregular sailings depart from here to the village of Mevagissey, further west as well. Another great day out if you're staying longer in Foy. But sadly, as we now see the Polruan ferry arriving right on time, it's here that we've reached the end of our walk around Foy, a truly delightful port town with a wealth of heritage. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to visiting Foy for yourself sometime soon.